The artwork styled on country, I needed to work on a collection of art that responded to some art that my aunt had done. And she had made a mourning cap. And my aunt was really important in terms of with my children and with me as I lived with her. So she was an aunt, but she was like a sister as well, but definitely my mum's younger sister. And she would walk on country with us and definitely with my two children, and it filled a space because they had questions, as kids do, about the place that our mum had grown up on, and she knew information that I didn't know, that I wasn't privy to, because she remembers my mum as her older sister. But she also knew cultural information around the place. And she had a softness, but when she spoke, you stopped and listened and took on board what she was saying. So one of the things that she did, she made a mourning cap when she was going through a really hard time in her life. And I thought about her a lot, and I didn't want my mourning caps to be about a death of somebody, and hers was responding to the death of her child. But I wanted to make mine in terms of the sorts of things that I felt like we were struggling to hold on to. And some of those things are old stories and importance of being in the space and the place that's important to you. And throughout my I'm a classroom teacher, and over the years I would be telling stories, and I used to sometimes be reading stories out of books, and I thought, we have stories that are not in the books, but oral stories. So I wanted to be able to put those thoughts and the energies of things that had been taken away from our family into these mourning caps. And so it's mourning the loss of the freedom of storytelling and the stories that, like she would talk about her dad, my grandfather, having to sneak out at night and in the darkness be able to do his cultural business with family and friends off the mission. And I thought, we shouldn't be sneaking around. You know, these stories belong to our family from thousands of years. So she would remind me that our family weren't allowed to speak the language. Our families weren't allowed to do cultural business. So they would go off and do these things. But I was in a privileged spot where I could do this without being pulled up. Mind you, in making them, I thought about all of the people that were really important in my life. And so each of the caps that I made, I would go into a zone. Even though I'm playing with tissues and glue and moulding, I'd sometimes put them on and thinking about how that's the place where you do all your thinking and your energies are in the caps. And I thought, this is where these caps could be quite important in terms of a part of the storytelling. So each of them don't look exactly the same as each other, but they're moulded in terms of what my energies and my thoughts are. So she was important in placing the stories back. And my children owned them as well. And then I took these caps after I made them. I took them home because I live in Bundeena, so that's away from country. And I took them home so that family members could hold them in their hands. And I would explain what I was thinking about while I was making the caps. So even doing a little bit of embroidery on them or adding something that made me think of home or a place or an item. And then the conversations around the kitchen table while we're sitting there with the caps were really important. Like they had an energy. And then I put them back in my box and drove back to Sydney and then put them on show here. And so that is the sort of backdrop to where my thought processes were and what I was thinking about while I made them. And I would sometimes just pick up a leaf or, as you're walking through, a bit of rusting corrugated iron, some wire. And they were placed around because they still belong on country, but it's about change. The wires, the fences, the boundaries that were put up, all that are like little triggers for what you do. And then listening to what other people were talking about. I mean, you could go for hours with the conversations that were around the table, but it felt really good handing a cap to somebody and asking them to put ochre on for the photographs that I had taken of people with them on. And the ochre we used was in memory of the people who weren't part of our life anymore. So it was like holding on to the stories in a spiritual way. And some of the caps, I've actually put some of that ochre into the making of the cap as well. And it's white, so it disappears in there, but it feels like it's got a little piece of country involved in there. And you can't capture everything that's said around the table, and you can't unhear it either. It's there with you, so it makes the story stronger. When I was a kid, you got dressed up to go to town because we lived on the outskirts of town on the mission, and going to town was a big deal for the aunts, and they'd get all frocked up because, time to go and do the grocery shopping and whatever other things they had to do in town. But they dressed up for it. And back in the day, hats and gloves were a part of it, but they were still hanging on to the hats. So there are some hats that had a flower attached, or, it's like it meant going to town was a big deal and being the same as everybody else, And for me, as a kid, I used to just think the hats were beautiful. I think it was the energy about going to town and knowing that when they came back, there'd be treats in amongst that basic shopping. There would be a jar of jam or some honey or something, the sweetening to the stories. And for me, any of those stories and any time sitting around the kitchen table was where the aunts would yarn it up, and they were connected to all those stories. And that, I hope I never unsee that. I hope that just stays with me forever, because if I could have a taste of that every time I go home, sitting around, and sometimes when those aunts and the cousins and nieces, when we get together, it is a good belly laugh, but it's also about us coming together as one. So it's really important. So those hats bring back fond memories, and the morning cap in that is I would love to be able to hang on to that. But some of those aunts are gone, and some of the changes that are happening are out of my control, but I can't undo that. I love that. And I will make a pot of tea, and my dining room table is my meeting place in my house, and I love putting on a big feast or, yarning up around, and I love making scones. And I don't necessarily have the hat to put on, but there you go. That's what making those caps did for me. They put me back in that space.